So let me go ahead and I will share out our agenda for today. And then forgive me because things always like to move around once I shared my screen. But real quick, I just didn't know if anyone had any questions on our revised meeting schedule. Because we're moving to Thursdays, we also had to kind of juggle how some of the weeks were laid out due to the kind of avoiding Thursdays with board meetings and other events that other planning partners hold throughout the area. So hopefully that all looks good. And then also, because OTO has swapped our TPC and our board meetings between kind of the opposite every other month, that means that we would be adopting in July instead of June. So that gives us a little bit more wiggle room for finalizing the plan and everything. And so we were able to kind of work that into the schedule as well. But if there aren't any other questions on that, I will jump right into the public input results. So let's see, it might be easier if I just do this from the website and then we can dig into things or if there's different questions. Let's see, share screen. Okay. So as oh, I'm sorry, my computer locked up for a second. Okay. So we started kicking off our public input during the spring, kind of right about the time of COVID hit. And so we went out and tried to work with the libraries and get a lot of input that way, and we were still able to get some help. We weren't able to do some of the additional in-person things that we wanted to do. This summer, later this summer and fall, we did do a big campaign with Facebook and kind of multiple drawings and boosting posts to different parts of our region. And then we also worked with each of our communities to help get the word out. And then on top of that, we sent out, gosh, 10,000 postcards. We kind of went through, and I won't say necessarily that it was random, but I will say that the it was spread out. So Dave went through all the property, all the kind of addresses in our area and selected kind of every other, however that worked out to get us 10,000 addresses. And so we feel like that was a fairly representative push out to everybody. And then also we had a lot of help from our different communities pushing the survey on their website and Twitter and Facebook and those things. And so that said, we received 864 completed surveys. I usually kind of ignore this response distribution based on the map just because I know like a lot of cell phones and different internet providers really can change how someone's location might be perceived. But at least we'll say 85% of them came from Missouri. So, but I know even like my cell phone, if I do something on there, it likes to say I'm like from St. Louis somewhere. So, I will, this very first question, and I didn't include that with what I had sent out with the agenda, but there are 80 some pages of people basically saying, if you had to pick just one improvement by 2045, what would it be? And we are currently going through, let me see if I can switch which screen I'm sharing here real quick, and I'll show you. We are going through and kind of categorizing them so that we can more easily see kind of how many things relate to that particular item. And so a little over halfway at the moment, but it is very strongly skewed. I won't say skewed. I guess the answers very strongly represent trails and bikes and sidewalks. Those show up a lot. Kansas Expressway and or a additional route like here, but another route from Springfield to Nixa shows up in some combination over and over and over again. We do see a lot of CC and 14, MM's popped up, passenger rail service is showing up a lot. And you'll see that in one of the later questions too. And I'm not sure where that drive is coming from. If anyone has any insight as to why that might be coming up, unless people are just more trying to think of statewide things. You'll see again. Oh, go ahead, Frank.
I was going to say, when we did our long range plan in 2014 at the state level, and I was doing surveys of people in the area, I heard that a lot too, in Springfield and Joplin about passenger rail.
Yeah.
And trail came up a lot also too. So it's really consistent with what you're hearing 6 years ago.
Well, that's good. We are also seeing like I-4465, Campbell, and then some of the mentions for 160, I am going to need to kind of look a little bit closer and see if we're talking about more north or more south, since 160 to Willard and 160 to Nixa. Sometimes it's not always, but I can probably tell by looking maybe more into the results and who answered the question, what zip code they said they lived in, and that sort of thing. So a couple of these we'll have to kind of clean up a little bit, but CMM a lot also. And so really I-44, kind of the things that we're already paying attention to, things that are already our priorities. But it was just also really encouraging to see, I guess, that the efforts that we're doing with our trail study and, you know, all the additional kind of things that we're trying to do to touch all the different kinds of transportation in the region, that those things are also showing up in the survey results, you know, even down to ITS. And so we'll finish kind of categorizing this and assigning some way of saying, you know, so many people, whoops, that one, you know, we're looking for these kinds of answers. And then we'll also be able to compare that to, you know, what zip codes people answered from and that sort of thing. And so that was just that very first question. It was very open-ended, but it was a lot more consistent in the answers, I guess, than I anticipated, which is good because that makes it easier to analyze. Okay, so let's go back to the survey. And so some of these are similar questions to what we addressed when we did our visioning with the board and the TPC back in the spring. But the first question, where are we? What makes moving around the Ozarks great? You know, what are our strengths? And it was just kind of a mark all that apply. And so I think a lot of people probably did mark multiple answers based on this. But that scenery, natural environment, that came up as the number one thing. And that is our, I don't know necessarily that's our transportation strength, but you know, it probably does make the drive at least more pleasant going through all of that. And I know that's how that came up in our visioning. After that, our low travel times, good road conditions, trails, connectivity, those were kind of those other ones that received a lot of attention. And so I know those are all things that we also like to say when we talk about our transportation, is that, those low travel times, I know we point to that a lot. And we do have a great trail system, and our roads continue to be in good condition, especially on the major roads. And so those are all really great things to see. Things that didn't get marked, and I don't know if people just, kind of what their philosophy was and going through, they just kind of, because it was mark all that apply. But transit was not listed as a strength. Complete streets, partnerships, planning, some of those things didn't rise to the top. So just something to kind of pay attention to. And then we'll also go through, again, how people kind of filled in the things that they were looking for. And I see this pop up a lot. So Christy, at the airport, everyone's always asking for Southwest Airlines. I'm sure you've never heard that before, but
yes, I've never heard it. No.
So are there any questions or anything you want me to dive into on this one? Okay. And then the next question was kind of those challenges. Why can't we get there? What's the hardest part about getting around? And so congestion popped up right away, but then right with that was distracted driving and not pedestrian friendly. And those really, followed by funding, popped out as the most predominant answers. And then you can kind of see here how that popped up. And so unfortunately, at the distracted driving, I know at the state level, we currently have a texting ban for younger drivers, but it's not all ages. And I know that is a MoDOT legislative priority. I'm not sure how much, OTO can do with that with some of our projects and different things, but there might be some other efforts we can look into as far as what our role would be for that. Congestion, I think we're always trying to work towards addressing those concerns. Pedestrian friendly, I think that goes back to people asking for the trails and the sidewalks and everything, and funding's at least recognized as an issue as well. And then on, we have about 9 pages of, people's individual answers. And so we'll kind of finish going through those and see if there's a consistent theme as well to add to what was specified above. So are there any questions or comments on this?
Natasha, I have a question.
Yeah.
Looking at the strengths, one of our biggest strengths is low travel times, and one of our greatest challenges is congestion. That seems a little contradictory. So can you tell from the comments, are these different people or what's going on with that?
Yeah, I'll probably need to go through and we'll have the ability to kind of like cross-reference the answers and see if those 16% of people are the ones that, answered something else. And so that is kind of the challenge with that, kind of mark all. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the same people answering, but that is something we can definitely kind of compare. But I'll make a note to definitely kind of pay attention to that as well.
Yeah, I just want to say that sample of addresses that we selected to send out the postcards to was geographically representative. So the number of addresses matched the proportion of population within each jurisdiction in our area. So you may have more responses from the city of Springfield who travel within Springfield that say, you know, it's more congested. And then people who live outside of Springfield who come into work can say that they like the travel times. So that might be something that's going on.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, the geography of where people are answering. And so I think we'll have some really interesting things to analyze kind of when we get down to that level.
Hey, Natasha,
Yeah.
kind of to comment to what Frank was saying, though, Frank, from somebody who runs a certain amount of miles every hour, we even on what you would consider really congested times, we don't add that much travel time to anywhere in Springfield. I wouldn't say with high congestion versus low congestion, you add 5 minutes to a crosstown trip on major arteries. So I think somebody could say, I just think there's too much traffic in Springfield, but I'm still getting places in a reasonable amount of time. And I would tell you most of my drivers probably feel that way too.
Yeah, that's kind of why I was asking, because I didn't know if it was it doesn't take long, but it's frustrating to make this trip versus some people were not having issues and others were feeling like they did have a lot of issues. Because it's still less than a fifth of all the respondents in each case, but they were bigger chunks for each.
Yeah, and I wouldn't know about what the respondents were thinking, but it would, I think I could rationalize very easily what would look like it's contradictory.
And you'll see later down, we ask people about their commute to home, to work, and school or errands. And generally the consensus is that our congestion is inconvenient but mild. So probably most of us agree with that. So okay, are there any other comments or questions about the kind of the strengths or weaknesses? Okay. So then this had more of a, instead of just, give us any answer, it's more specifically, among these items, if, there were no obstacles, what could we accomplish by 2045? And what do you think the region will be like? And so the largest response was for trails, connected and regional trails. And then after that was more complete streets. And then they're still looking for those lower drive times. And so that's kind of something I think, Frank, that someone really, we have good low drive times, but we still want lower drive times. But again, probably who doesn't, honestly. Move closer, right? No. So those will be some things to dig into also, but I think we're definitely seeing this continued trail or continued trend of trails and complete streets. We even had a few ask for drone deliveries. And I know some members here have talked about that a little bit too. In fact, these are all things that, again, came up during that discussion with the our visioning. And so that's what we use to kind of feed how we structured the survey. So if you're kind of wondering why we threw drone deliveries in there, some of that did come out of our visioning workshop. Looking for more mixed use developments, I think some of that might tie in to, the fact that people want to be able to accomplish more things in one place, maybe live and work or live and shop, those kind of things together. But in addition, we still had some votes for access management. A few people still found some value in autonomous vehicles, more capacity and aesthetics. We're kind of even at just over 10%. But yeah, we definitely still have some things that have trended, you know, kind of to the higher end of these answers. And this one we had a few more people kind of offer their own answers as well. There's that passenger service again for train. So anyway, are there any questions or comments about this? Okay.
And Natasha, just
Yeah.
so the rest of the group knows, MoDOT is working on an update to our freight and rail plan, which is covering the passenger rail service provided by the state. And really that is focused on our Missouri River Runner line between St. Louis and Kansas City and our existing Amtrak lines, which none of that goes to our area. There's some acknowledgement about the public desire for the service statewide, but it's mostly focused on kind of retaining what we've got now, just because that's taking all the resources we have.
Well, and I wonder, you know, kind of when we were doing the big push for the survey and whatnot, there was a lot of information in the news about Hyperloop and, you know, Missouri going for that pilot project and not getting it. But I just wonder if some of that discussion hasn't kind of brought that concept forward again for people. And again, Hyperloop would have been doing that same route as the River Runner. So, you know, probably it is good if we maybe at least continue to explore or consider or review how we connect Springfield to either St. Louis or Kansas City or both, when a lot of that focus seems to be just on that St. Louis to Kansas City connection.
Yeah, I think we definitely need to keep sharing that. We're getting a lot of public support for passenger rail in this area. And like I said, this is not just a Springfield thing. Joplin is right there too.
Okay.
On the aesthetics, you know, that
Yeah.
sort of echoes what the Springfield Ford SGF plan has been talking about. Is there a way to tell if that was sort of channeling that sentiment, or is that region wide?
That is something that we'll be able to dig into also. Let's see, let's scroll too far. Yeah, that's something that, but I think we are hearing that region-wide, even just anecdotally. Like I know, you know, some of our, you know, communities are coming, you know, they're hearing that and they're wanting to incorporate those things as well. And so I will say, if we decide that that's something that we want to focus on as well, when we do go and look at our priorities and our kind of fiscal constraint side of the plan and stuff, we'll probably want to make sure that we recognize if that's something we want to focus on and allow room for that in our costing of projects and kind of how much funding we allocate for various things. And so, because they do add to the cost, but if that's a priority, then that means maybe we just do one less project and we make the other ones look better. And so that is something to think about. Let's see. Okay, so the next one. So what opportunities should we use to our advantage? The expanded trails system popped up first, but there's a lot of things that are kind of within that, maybe, you know, 9.5 to 11.5% or so that come up. But community engagement, looking for long-term funding, more regional planning, which wasn't, you know, mentioned as a strength for the area. And so that's something that we could either look to do more of, or inform people that we are doing these things. And it's probably, you know, maybe beyond just what we're doing with transportation, but kind of just all the way around with the region working together. That collaboration and partnership comes up too. But looking at increasing funding, you know, we had a lot of talk during our, especially the board visioning workshop, about the civic education, and that, you know, maybe wasn't one of the highest, but it definitely does rank up in the middle of what actions we need to take for the future. And so I guess it's nice to see that that's recognized by the public as well. Anything that anyone wants to point out here? And John, I know you're just joining us from another meeting, but I wanted you to know that trails have been, so far, you know, going through the survey results here, trails are showing up over and over and over. So
Excellent.
yeah.
Of course they are.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's fine. Along with other things, but yes,
Sure,
no.
sure.
I will say, kind of over and over in these answers, nothing has, you know, we don't have any mandate on any one thing. It's kind of, I think people are seeing that a lot of these things work together to create a more positive result, but nothing, you know, very often is just kind of out here. And if there were any other comments anyone wanted to talk about in relation to what we can do to improve our future. Okay. So again, this one, my plan is to dump it into some sort of word cloud and we can see what pops up. But I like that second answer right there, complex. I think that's probably pretty accurate. But I think we do see a lot of this, like, you know, connected, safe. We kind of flip through. Right, well, it's not letting me click through, but you know, I think we're going to see some of those same themes over and over and over again. And so this kind of gets more into the discussion on congestion. How would you rate congestion in the region? And kind of the average of answers for on your way to work, home, to and from school, or errands is that inconvenient but doesn't last long. I think, you know, everyone's experience is a little bit you know, different depending on where they live. But if we kind of drill down specifically, like your level of congestion on your way to work. And so part of the reason we asked on your way to work, on your way from work or home, I know it's not a guarantee what time of day someone, you know, leaves and comes home, but generally it's AM and PM. The census asks all the questions. So when we refer to our travel times from the census, it's a journey to work. How long did it take you to get to work? And we know that, you know, from reviewing all of our prioritization and our performance measures, that our AM peak is much less congestion than our PM. And so we kind of wanted to get a feel for what people thought, kind of basically to work and from work as well. But the majority inconvenient but doesn't last long, followed by mild inconvenience. Almost 15%, well, a little over 14% say it is a serious issue. 2% say it's terrible in a parking lot. And that, again, might just depend on that time of day or what roads you travel. But in comparison, so that was about 35 and 26. Not too far off for way home. But it's terrible parking lot and serious issue is a little bit higher. And so that probably does reflect what we see in reality of, our roads being more congestion in the evenings.
Hey, Natasha, when you
Yeah.
guys ask that question on the data that you get, the AM peak versus the PM peak, is there any way to differentiate, for those individuals that maybe they're going to work is actually what we consider the PM peak because they are working a night shift or working overnight like that?
Yeah, and we did not ask that question.
Okay, was just
And
curious.
so, yeah, but that would have been a good follow-up. And so to and from school, kind of a similar, but really this terrible department, but then school traffic is its own struggle sometimes also. And so I don't know if they're referring to, maybe more specifically, near or at the school. But those are, I think, also show that kind of that more protracted PM congestion as well. And then just running errands. So just, going about town, doing whatever, probably weekends. Mild inconvenience. It's so it's a little bit less of a problem. So is there anything kind of relating to this? So Frank, going back to that earlier conversation about congestion being a problem, there's that was about 16%, I think it was, and we've got about 20% on these saying that it's a serious issue. And so, that might correlate to those people as well, but we'll be able to kind of do that cross-reference.
And about 15% saying it's not a problem, and that could be the low travel time people too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's about the same. So, so then we asked several questions about transportation funding. And so looking at the short term and in the long term, and basically what do they think of the current level of investment? So nearly 50% thought that in the short term, our current level of investment should be somewhat increased. 25% said significantly increased. But then we still have about 25% that think it should stay the same or be reduced. And I know our survey is probably not representative of maybe the voting crowd. This has not been, the experience with, the way the vote's gone statewide and whatnot. But at least we can see some support, and we do see that continued support locally with our local sales tax initiatives. Long term, it's about 5% more. They think the current level of investment should be increased. So really close on the somewhat, but about 5% more on the significant. And then the remain the same is a little bit less. That's kind of where the majority came from that shifted around. So then we asked, how would you allocate $100 of transportation funding? So 35% said passenger rail, which that was, after everything else being kind of just, very average in all the answers. And then just to see that, and then maintaining our existing streets and highways was 40%. And so that one was just such a huge number that answered that. That just kind of was surprising.
That's one of the things I wish we could do at the passenger rail conversation, is sort of make it a, suppose it cost you $200 a ticket, or suppose it required a half-cent sales tax. Do you still want the passenger rail as badly as you're saying right now, to kind of get more of a deep dive into it? Although it looks like they do want to put some money into it.
Or they just think it's expensive and it'll just take that much of their money.
Yeah, I mean, it is.
Yeah,
that's a really interesting result.
So, yeah, just out of everything else, and then to have that just pop up so much larger was just really interesting. But beyond those two things, building streets and expanding public transit are kind of the next two. So let's see. Some of the things, and I do wonder sometimes if it is just more of an impression of what things cost to do, because not nearly as much was allocated towards building and improving bicycle and pedestrian facilities, and yet all of our other answers have been, to support those things, and sidewalks and trails, and maybe because we have a couple of things that, so if you add those all up, that's about, another 9%. So there might be some other ways to dig into these results as well. So then we asked about support for sources of funding. And we'll just kind of dig into each one. So tolls on new roads and bridges. We had a few that would support that or would want more information. But generally speaking, the majority answers were not supportive. Existing roads and bridges, definitely not as supportive. Increased tax on the amount of gas. Generally supportive, but not over 50%. I'm surprised we have about 20% consistently just saying I would need more information. So that would probably speak to whatever that tax or funding increase would be. A good information campaign would need to accompany that. But looking at like a VMT tax instead of a gas tax, not supportive. So, people I think are much more comfortable with the idea of a fuel tax than a VMT tax. So increased vehicle registration fees, not supportive. Sales tax, not supportive, though a little bit closer to the idea of support. Local sales tax, thought this was interesting. Of course, it'd be increasing versus the tax that we continue to pass is, it's already in place, and most places are just renewing them regularly. And so I thought that was interesting. Property taxes, that was that probably got the least support. And then looking at like a TDD or CID, that sort of thing, that actually had support. And having developers pay impact fees had a lot of support. So I think what we really saw come out of this was gas tax, and then kind of putting the improvements costs like on the properties where those improvements are needed. And so those were kind of just the, what would you support transportation funding wise? I don't know, are there any comments or questions on these? Anything surprising, not surprising? Okay.
Well, Natasha, what was the overall support for more funding? Is that, I guess my question is that matching up with where the particular methods for raising funds?
Let's see. So I would say probably that's well,
Yeah,
'cause
it's
we
like
had
the
about
same number of people
70
saying it should be increased, or
yeah, in fact, we had about 75%
Sorry, go ahead.
supportive of an increase, and only about 50% supported any one solution. Well,
but that's
yeah.
usually when you count the people needing the information. It's just, yeah, it's kind of like they don't like any of the methods, but they want to see more money in transportation.
Yeah. So I think, we just need to buy a printing press and we can do that for them. No. But yeah, so I think, that's definitely the challenge of how do you go about raising that funding, even though people are supportive of it, they're not supportive of the same ways.
I also think the TDD and CID result, I think people don't realize how often they would end up paying that.
Yes. Yeah, it's fine as long as you don't shop there, right? So then we asked some questions about bicycling. So if you own a bicycle, how do you use it? 30% actually said they don't own a bicycle. Another 20% said they haven't ridden it in years. So there's at least opportunity there. But a good chunk, exercise and recreation. As far as how I get around or running errands or work, it's about 5%. So I think that was just kind of interesting, but probably, John, you would probably say most of your users, I imagine, are there for recreation or exercise. Is that your experience? So we've followed that up with, just other. And so I think for a lot of people, it's just about where they are in their particular location in the world as to getting around also. So then zip code where you work and your home zip code. But because these are quote unquote text answers, we'll have to go through and kind of map how that works. But we'll be able to do a little bit of comparison there as well. And then just kind of your basic demographic. Had a pretty even split between male and female. Our age range, the majority were between 35 and 44. But I would say fairly representative of kind of the full gamut of the population there, all the different age ranges. Maybe a little less on the college crowd. The majority of the respondents were white, but we did get a few from other categories. And a few, you know, there's always somebody in the crowd. Monorail. But and a handful of Hispanic, Latino, Spanish origin. And then we did offer a chance to win a prize for taking the survey. And that took them to a different route. So those are the kind of overall results, and we're working on kind of pulling together all the nuances. I wanted to have that conversation today, so I kind of, you know, if there's some additional things we need to dig into or try to find a better answer for, so that we can do that going forward. But any thoughts, overall impressions? I know several of you have been working on your own comprehensive plans and done your own public input. Are these things that are consistent or inconsistent with what you've seen?
Did we net maintenance enough? Taking care of what's already here?
Yeah, and so kind of in a roundabout way, we addressed that in several spots. You know, we were, I guess, our good road conditions were a strength. Let's see, we also, you know, that was, I think, one of the large, besides passenger rail, that was kind of the largest place where people said they would want to spend their money. Would be on maintaining those existing roads and highways.
Okay. Yeah, and the price tag for that passenger rail is very high if you want to beat a car.
Yeah.
That is an outlier.
Yeah, I would agree. And so we'll probably do some more digging in on that one as well. But it also showed up, you know, it wasn't just there, it showed up a lot as we go through this first one. If they were to have one improvement. Jeremy or Jeff, how does this fit in with what you guys have done with your plans?
Natasha, ours won't be completed until May, but I mean, this is really going kind of hand in hand with what we have seen so far, as with the pedestrian facilities, the trails, congestion, everything. I mean, it seems to be the same consensus with the people in Nixa.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Jeff. This is it's encouraging to see how well these are aligned with our recent updates to our comprehensive plan, and then some of the other planning measures that we've taken over the last couple of years. So yeah, overall, pretty well in line.
That's good to hear. Garrett, I know you guys said you won't be doing some more transportation stuff till the spring, but on the input side, how does that look? Okay, well, he must have stepped away for a moment. Now, even on the county side, Joel or Adam, any thoughts there? Or Todd in Christian County? I know you're working on some things too.
This is Adam. I don't know that I've got any other good comparative data. I mean, we haven't done, to my knowledge, any surveys that compare well to this. So I don't, unless Joel knows of something, I mean, I don't know that I've got any comparative data to put context to it, I guess. Joel, do you know of anything?
No, I'm really not aware of anything. It seems very consistent with some of the other surveys we've done, though, with the emphasis on the bike pedestrian and the congestion. So that's all I really have to add.
Okay, Todd, anything from Christian County's perspective?
No, we really haven't begun.
Okay, Todd, even though you're unmuted, we're not able to hear you very well. Not sure if you're still talking.
No.
Okay, well, please feel free to use the chat. If there is something you're trying to say. Well, if there's anything else you want us to focus on or dig into, just let us know. And we'll kind of get this all put together in a more digestible format for everyone. Let's see.
I guess just to reinforce, Mrs. Kirk.
Yeah.
We are seeing a lot of discussions about trails, biking, and those kinds of things. So that's pretty consistent with what you're showing here.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to know that for some reason our survey is not way off base some other direction, and I think that'll make it easier as we move forward regionally, talking about priorities. Which takes me to the next item on our agenda, unless anyone has anything else they want to talk about. Todd does say in the chat, we don't have any new info to add or compare with quite yet. But if no one has anything else on the survey, go back to the agenda and okay, well, somehow I've lost that on my screen. Ah, there we go. Let's see. There we go. So our next meeting is scheduled for January 28th. And so I'd like to continue our conversation on prioritization criteria, and then looking at recommendations to make within the plan. And so we'll put some things together regarding the recommendations we had from the last plan, and then also based on you know, kind of what our communities are working on and what's come out of our public input and those things. So be thinking about you know, ways we can work on that as well. Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, if you think of anything, let me know. And we will see you, well, probably actually next week we have our e-meeting. It's just going to be an email meeting for the TPC, reviewing some tip amendments. And then this month it's board. So just don't forget, we're not meeting the third Wednesday for the TPC, meeting the third Thursday for the board. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. And I hope you all had a good holiday and enjoyed the snow a little bit. It was nice not to have a bunch of ice. So, Frank, were there any issues with plowing or?
I think we've had a relatively easy winter so far.
Knock on wood, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
We've had enough
mild.
people to do the work, I think.
So, all right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Natasha, you did a good job going over that.
Oh, thank you.
Yes,
I know
thank you.
it's kind of a lot, but yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we had your input as we dig into kind of how we review the results. So let's see.
All right, thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.